What if I told you Mondstadt, the city of freedom, was almost sold off to Zhongli? From fallen kingdoms on frozen peaks to a rebellion led by a pyro gladiator who ascended to Celestia, this is the entire history of Mondstadt from the Primordial Era right up until the start of Genshin Impact's main story. A land that's been broken and rebuilt more times than we can count, but still manages to feel like home. Long ago, the world of Teyvat was ruled by dragons, the 7 sovereigns, each representing a pure elemental power. But everything changed when the heavenly principles attacked. Seeking control, it created the 4 shining shades, powerful entities that served its will. Among them was Istaroth, the ruler of time, Nibirius, the ruler of life, and Renova, the ruler of death. The heavenly principles and its shades defeated the 7 sovereigns, and the age of dragon rule came to an end. From the wreckage, the gods began shaping heaven and earth to prepare a world for humanity, a new era ruled by divine design. Speaking of divine design, today's video is sponsored by Once Human, the thrilling free-to-play open-world survival game where the world has ended, monsters roam freely, and now gravity itself has lost its grip. With the release of the brand new Visional Wheel system, the game introduces Starfall Inversion, an exhilarating twist that changes everything you thought you knew about survival gameplay. In this groundbreaking new mode, the skies become your new battleground. When the Starfall Inversion event triggers, a zero-gravity tide sweeps across the map. Suddenly, your jumps are higher, your vehicles float like they're weightless, and fall speeds slow to a dreamlike drift. It's chaotic, it's gorgeous, and it's insanely fun. You're no longer just surviving on the ground, you're diving through the air, hunting down powerful elite enemies that spawn in the skies above the wasteland. Defeating these airborne threats earns you gravity crystals, a rare and powerful resource used to craft exclusive gear, tame new animals, and unlock twisted Starfall Inversion morph deviations that feel like something straight out of your strangest sci-fi dream. Every second of Starfall Inversion feels like an event, wild, unexpected, and deeply rewarding for players who dare to take the leap. Once Human continues to prove that it's not just another survival game, it's actually a constantly evolving genre-bending experience packed with style, story, and standout mechanics. And with full cross-platform play on both PC and mobile, you can dive headfirst into the chaos wherever you are. So if you're ready to survive the apocalypse in the sky with monsters while defying gravity itself, then there's only one place to be. Use the link in the description and pinned comment down below to play Once Human today. Thank you so much, Once Human, for sponsoring today's video. Although the heavenly principles won the war, not all the dragons accepted defeat. The Dragon King Nibelung, refusing to surrender to the alien gods, turned to forbidden knowledge in a desperate bid for vengeance. Seeking power from beyond the stars, Nibelung opened the door to the abyss, and thus began the Great War of Vengeance, a war that would haunt the world long after it ended. A group of people sought refuge from the chaos and destruction of the Great War of Vengeance. They stumbled upon a lush green mountain and decided to settle there. They called it Vindagnyr and built a beautiful kingdom on its peak, naming the city Sal Vindagnyr. It flourished into a grand civilization with a towering castle, a deep connection to nature, and a mysterious ore called Star Silver. At the heart of their city stood a large white tree, believed to be sacred. Under this tree, a princess was born. She had the powerful ability to see the future. One day, the princess dreamed of a terrible dragon named Durin, spreading poison across the land. Her people, scared of this vision, thought it might be a curse. Meanwhile, far above the mountain, Celestia, the floating home of the gods, was said to be looming overhead. It's unclear for how long, but its presence didn't go unnoticed. Around 6,000 years ago, the heavenly principles emerged victorious from the Great War of Vengeance, and to cleanse Teyvat of lingering abyssal corruption brought to the world by Nibelung, it began casting down the celestial nails. One of these nails caused a catastrophe that would change Mondstadt's history forever. A huge divine artifact called the Skyfrost Nail fell from the heavens and struck the mountain. Suddenly, the once green slopes were covered in snow and ice. The city was trapped in a never-ending winter. During this time, a foreign traveler named Aymon Locker lived in Sal Vindagnyr. Before leaving the kingdom to search for answers about the Skyfrost Nail disaster, the princess gave him a great sword forged from Star Silver and promised she'd make him a painting to remember her by. But the situation only got worse. The princess tried to finish her final fresco while her father, the high priest, climbed the mountain desperate for guidance. The trees were dying, the snow kept falling, and hope was fading. The Skyfrost Nail splits in 3 pieces, then fragments further, releasing 3 orbs that freeze particular locations. One of these pieces shattered the Irminsul tree on the mountain into the frost-bearing tree that stands today. The princess tried to save the white tree by grafting its last branch onto another tree, but failed. She died there beside it. A man named Uko later found her body and buried her. A respawning frost-armed lava trail on Dragonspine can be fought with the name Uko. Aemon Locker eventually returned, only to find Sal Vindagnyr frozen and lifeless. Heartbroken, he left the Star Silver Greatsword among the princess's unfinished paintings. Having seen how cruel the gods could be, he made a choice. If Celestia only understood war and sacrifice, then he would give them exactly that. And with that, he left to join a war, one of many that would unfortunately follow. After the fall of Sal Vindagnyr and before the chaos of the Archon War, there was a quieter period in Teyvat's history. While it doesn't have an official name, Liyue's records suggest that this was a time of relative peace, at least compared to what came before and after. During this interim period, some civilizations were quietly thriving in the region we now know as Mondstadt. One of them built Cecilia Garden, a place in Windwhale Highland where they grew the delicate Cecilia flowers inside greenhouses. We don't know much about who these people were, but the style of the ruins suggests they may have been connected to later Mondstadt civilizations, possibly even Decarabians. Meanwhile, on Starsnatch Cliff, another ancient society built a place called the Summer Nacht Garden. After their civilization fell, the entire garden was buried underground and is now known as the Midsummer Courtyard, where nowadays players farm artifacts not knowing they're standing on the ruins of a lost culture. Around this time, a powerful being named Boreas gained his divine powers from an unknown ancient god. He would eventually become one of the most important figures in Mondstadt's lore. Then came Decarabian. He was one of the early god kings of Teyvat and set up his capital city in what is now Stormterror's lair. His city was carefully designed with the whole thing arranged in a perfect circle around his towering fortress. Soldiers guarded the narrow canyon entrances, and every citizen had an assigned spot within the city. The entire region was buried in blizzards, and while the source of the storms isn't totally clear, Boreas seems to be the main culprit. Whether he intended to freeze the land or just existed too intensely is up for debate, but it made life outside the city miserable. Decarabian responded by building a giant storm wall to protect his city from the freezing winds. It worked. Sort of. Decarabian believed his city was perfectly ordered and that his rule was just. He saw himself as a protector, shielding his people from the deadly blizzards with his storm barrier. But what he didn't realize was that his protection felt more like a prison. His obsession with maintaining order led him to micromanage every aspect of life in the city, from assigning citizens their living quarters to banning certain musical chords that might inspire rebellion. Decarabian wasn't evil in the traditional sense. He simply didn't understand what it meant to be human. He thought he loved his people and assumed they loved him in return. But his idea of love was cold, distant, and fundamentally alien. At one point, he even took a human lover, a woman named Amos. But she soon realized his affection was hollow, nothing like the love she felt for him. When Decarabian looked down from his tower, he saw his people bowing and believed it was out of respect and devotion. In reality, they bowed not in reverence, but because the storm winds he summoned were so violent, they had no choice but to kneel. The people longed to see the world beyond the walls of wind, and over time, they stopped seeing him as a guardian and started seeing him as a tyrant. Eventually, their desire for freedom sparked a full-blown rebellion, one that would bring his reign to an end. The Archon War was a worldwide power struggle among gods, each trying to claim one of the 7 divine thrones of Celestia. Around 3,700 years ago, 7 of these celestial seats opened up, sparking a fierce war between gods who all claimed to represent the best future for humanity. Some were idealists, others opportunists, but all of them were willing to fight and die for power. To make things worse, it wasn't just gods getting involved. Monsters, spirits, and ancient beings saw the chaos as their chance to expand their territories, turning Teyvat into a constant battlefield. Hunger Games, but all the tributes are gods, basically. In the middle of it all stood Mondstadt, ruled by not just one, but two rival kings of frost and wind. Around 2,600 years ago, Boreas, the king of the North Wind, challenged Decarabian for control of Mondstadt. But despite his power, Boreas couldn't even scratch the city, which was protected by a massive storm wall. What followed was a long and miserable stalemate. People living inside the city grew more frustrated under Decarabian's rule, while the world outside remained frozen and unlivable. During this time, a boy known only as the Nameless Bard dreamed of a freer world, one filled with birds, sunshine, and open skies. He befriended a small, seemingly harmless wind spirit, and while that spirit seemed weak, it would later become Barbados, the god of freedom. Meanwhile, the clan we now know as the Gunhilders had had enough of Decarabian's rule. Led by their chieftain, they escaped the city, but life outside was just as cruel. Blizzard after blizzard made survival almost impossible. In desperation, they prayed for salvation. Their call was answered by the same little wind spirit, and also by Istaroth, the enigmatic ruler of time. With the people's faith strengthening them, the wind spirit created a shelter in the snow. Even in these hard times, life found little joys. According to legends, Barbados, still in his mischievous spirit form, once disguised himself as a fox, fermented some apples, and accidentally created the first wine in Mondstadt. One guard took a bite of the fermented fruit, and the rest is history. Wine became one of Mondstadt's oldest traditions, celebrated even to this day. But back in the city, the resistance was growing. People started using the word windbloom as a code to identify fellow rebels. One of the earliest users of this term was the red-haired warrior, a key figure in the uprising. Meanwhile, outside the city, an adventurer named Leonard invented the wind glider, hoping to reach the peak of Pylos Peak, what we now call Musk Reef. He never made it, but his dream of freedom in the skies became a part of Mondstadt's legacy. Eventually, Boreas came to a painful realization. His icy powers couldn't nurture life. Disillusioned with the world and knowing he couldn't become one of the seven, he let go of his physical form. His body faded, but his spirit lived on, powerful enough to form bodies of ice and wind even after death. With no god to defend them, the people rose up. The rebellion was led by the Nameless Bard, the wind spirit Barbados, the red-haired warrior, Decarabian's lover Amos, and a mysterious knight, possibly Gunhilder. Together they stormed the city, and Decarabian was slain. But unfortunately, so were Amos and the Nameless Bard. In victory, Barbados was elevated to godhood. To honor the Nameless Bard, Barbados took on a physical form that resembled his fallen friend, one who had inspired him to dream of freedom in the first place. And in memory of Amos, he may have taken up the bow. The red-haired warrior, for reasons we still don't fully understand, turned his back on Barbados. His name was forgotten, but his lineage lived on, eventually giving us the hero Ragnvindr, the Dawn Knight, and the Ragnvindr clan. As the newly instated Animo Archon, Barbados used his divine power to reshape Mondstadt. He blew away the snow and ice, transforming the landscape itself. Pylos Peak was swept off, becoming the floating island now known as Musk Reef. Barbados then led the people away from the ruins of the old city and founded a new one near Cider Lake, the modern-day Mondstadt city. Three major clans helped build the new city: the Gunhilders, the Eimenlocker clan, descendants of Sal Vindagnyr's only survivor, and the Lawrence clan, led by Venerary. Apparently, Barbados wasn't alone in guiding Mondstadt. He worked alongside Istaroth, the Shade and ruler of time. The people worship them both, believing that Animo brings stories while time nurtures them. But at some point, the records of Istaroth faded away, and their worship of her was forgotten. A powerful Animo dragon named Dvalin was born from pure Animo energy in the heavens. Elemental dragons are incredibly rare, and Dvalin was no exception. Don't forget, they were the original species of Tivat. He was so strong that he could rival the gods themselves. But instead of becoming an enemy, Dvalin was befriended by Barbados. The two formed a bond, and Dvalin went on to become the first member of the Four Winds, protectors of Mondstadt, and earned the respect of its people. At some point, the mysterious Hexenzirkel, a secretive coven of witches, challenged Barbados. Instead of fighting, Barbados turned to his usual strategy: music and charm. He sang instead of striking, and in the end, they became allies. He even helped conceal one of their meeting places and the lantern they used as a beacon. Eventually, Barbatos stepped back. He believed that true freedom was letting his people live without interference. So, he left Mondstadt to govern itself. And in honor of those who fought and died for freedom during Decarabian's rule, the Windbloom Festival was established. Originally a secret code among rebels, Windbloom became a celebration of love and freedom. The Archon War finally ended when the last divine seat in Celestia was claimed, solidifying the original 7 who would govern Teyvat. The defeated gods fled to distant islands in the Dark Sea. With the war over, it seemed like Mondstadt could finally enjoy peace. But, as time would soon show, sometimes humans driven by ambition and power can be even more dangerous than the gods they replaced. Barbatos' absence gave rise to a ruling class of aristocrats who were said to have been blessed by the gods. This era is the early aristocratic period of Mondstadt, and these aristocrats trace their bloodlines back to the heroes of Mondstadt's early days. Some of the most prominent clans were the Lawrences, the Gunhilders, and the Aymon Locker clan. One notable figure from this era was Venerary of the Lawrence clan. He built the iconic statue of Barbatos that still stands in front of the Favonius Cathedral. Below the statue, he and the other clan leaders inscribed a vow to protect Mondstadt. Despite the growing power of the nobility, many of Mondstadt's beloved traditions were started during this era. These included hunting events where nobles and commoners worked together and a variety of festivals. Ludi Harpastum, a 15-day celebration of wine, music, and freedom, which would later transform into something more sinister. Windbloom Festival and Vineless Fest, held during the harvest, which celebrates Barbatos' annual return with the west wind. At some point during the late aristocratic period, 1,600 to 1,000 years ago, a terrifying creature known as Ursa the Drake began terrorizing Mondstadt. While its origins remain unclear, Ursa would become a symbol of destruction for generations, feared by all who lived in the region. Around this time, the Lawrence clan rose to power and became the dominant ruling family of Mondstadt. At first, they were respected leaders, but over time, power corrupted them. The clan fell into decadence and cruelty, ruling like tyrants. They treated commoners as if they were lesser beings, enslaving them, exploiting them for labor, and viewing themselves as kings rather than protectors and providers. Although the Gunhilder clan kept their honor and did not follow the Lawrence clan's example, their influence faded as the Lawrences tightened their grip. The fate of the once respected Aymon Locker clan remains unknown, and most other noble families simply followed the Lawrences' lead. To keep control, the aristocracy went to great lengths to keep the people in the dark. They erased historical knowledge, removed relics that hinted at the truth, and enslaved anyone who dared speak out. Even the knightly order at the time, calling themselves the Starlit Knights, didn't stand for justice. They served the corrupt elite and helped keep the citizens in chains. According to the lore of the Royal Spear, Mondstadt's aristocracy had a very specific idea of what noble combat looked like. The nobles believed that only those of high blood were worthy of wielding swords. To them, the sound of swords clashing was like music, a chorus for lofty souls. Spears and bows were considered beneath them, and were the weapons of gladiators and commoners, tools meant for laborers and entertainers, not elites. The rot ran deep. The royal mages abandoned their duties to teach and guide, choosing instead to help the nobles maintain power. The Church of Favonius split, with its higher clergy aligning with the aristocracy to silence dissent and manipulate the masses. But change was coming. Over 1,000 years ago, a girl named Vennessa was born into a nomadic tribe that had once hailed from Natlan. Alongside her younger sister Lind, she grew up far from their ancestral home, wandering the lands for reasons that have long been lost to history. We can theorize that the tribe's exile from Natlan may have severed their connection to the Wyob, mysterious entities believed to protect their people. Without that protection, it's said that memory loss or confusion could set in, which might explain why they wandered for generations. But that's just a theory. What we do know is that Vennessa and her people were being hunted and starved by the monstrous dragon Ursa the Drake. Desperate, they fled north in search of safety only to end up in Mondstadt, where they were promptly enslaved by the ruling aristocracy. After standing up to Barca Lawrence, the heir of the Lawrence clan, Vennessa was sentenced to fight for her and her tribe's freedom in a brutal series of gladiator matches. However, she wasn't the only one trapped under the weight of a broken system. The origins of the Wanderers troupe are still shrouded in mystery. What we do know is that its founding members met one by one, beginning with the conductor and the sojourner, followed by the Dawnlight swordswoman and eventually Kreuzlied. Whether more members once traveled with them remains unknown. The troupe traveled far and wide across Tevat, even venturing into the Mer Javari to perform in the face of danger. Its members came from across the continent. The sojourner was a well-known figure from Fontaine, and Kreuzlied was born into the prestigious Lawrence clan of Mondstadt, though he later renounced his family name. Their journey ultimately brought them to Mondstadt just in time for the Ludi Harpastum festival. During their stay, the sojourner fell in love with a local girl who had been chosen to toss the ceremonial Harpastum ball, a tradition that marked her as the future bride of one of the ruling Lawrence nobles. Outraged by this injustice, the Wanderers troupe decided to fight back. They launched a rebellion in hopes of ending the aristocracy's grip on the city. Unfortunately, their efforts failed. The conductor and the sojourner were killed in battle, and the Dawnlight swordswoman was captured and forced to fight as a gladiator. As for Kreuzlied, his fate was never publicly revealed, but he was spared of execution due to his noble blood. Despite their defeat, the legacy of the Wanderers troupe lived on. The Dawnlight swordswoman inspired a young squire named Ragnvindr, who later became known as the Dawn Knight in her honor. Kreuzlied, on the other hand, used the time he had left to create an underground resistance group dedicated to bringing down the aristocracy. When Vennessa eventually led her own rebellion, it was Kreuzlied's network that helped turn the tide in her favor. Even after the aristocracy, Kreuzlied's secret society would constantly be working in the background. 500 years later, it was said that Rostam ran this organization in secret behind the Grand Master's back. Side note, and this is completely theory, but Kreuzlied's network could also be the underground intelligence network that Diluc joined after his Fatui rampage. Rebellion against an evil aristocracy is great and all, but not everyone who wanted to bring down the aristocracy had noble intentions. Eberhard, an illegitimate son of the noble Landric clan, was one of the most cunning and ruthless figures in Mondstadt's late aristocratic era. Raised alongside his two older half-brothers, Parsifal and Ingbert, Eberhard was never treated with the same respect due to his status as an illegitimate child. That bitterness grew over time and eventually turned into ambition. While the rest of the aristocracy was decaying into corruption and laziness, Eberhard dreamed of restoring its lost glory, but in his own twisted way. To achieve that, he started with his own family. He played on Parsifal's love of drama and chivalry, encouraging him to become a masked phantom thief. Somehow, Eberhard tricked him into fleeing Mondstadt entirely, removing him from the line of succession. Eberhard learned how to fight with a spear in secret, mastering it specifically to catch his brother Ingbert off guard in combat. Ingbert was a vision user, and a strong one at that. So, to get stronger, Eberhard became the student of the blue-eyed spear witch who created the legendary crescent pike. The witch loved Parsifal and trusted Eberhard, until Eberhard turned on her and killed her, exploiting her emotions just to gain her strength. Some 500 years after their deaths, Parsifal and the blue-eyed spear witch were used as the basis for a play written by the Fontanian playwright Coppelius. Like the rest of the aristocracy, Eberhard reveled in the gladiator arenas, where enslaved fighters were paraded like animals for sport. After many years of loyally fighting under his master Eberhard, the gladiator who wielded the death match, and who the gladiator's finale set belongs to, was killed by Vennessa. Despite fighting many bloody battles for Eberhard, even after he had already won his freedom, the gladiator found out that Eberhard had already left the scene for reasons unknown. As Mondstadt groaned under the weight of the corrupt aristocracy, the cries of the people finally reached its slumbering Archon. Barbados, long absent from his nation, awoke from his nap. Disguised as a bard named Venti, he quietly returned to Mondstadt and befriended Vennessa. Ursa the Drake was still terrorizing Mondstadt, so Lord Lawrence had struck a deal with the monster, planning to sacrifice Vennessa and her people in exchange for peace. It was meant to be a death sentence, but in that exact moment, Barbatos revealed his true form. He descended onto the battlefield, lent his strength to Vennessa, and together they defeated Ursa. The crowd that once cheered for blood now watched the turning of the tide. That moment marked the beginning of Vennessa's rebellion, which would finally end the aristocracy. The story told by official historians says that Barbatos presented a fake contract between the aristocrats and Morax, the Geo-Archon, claiming the aristocrats had sold Mondstadt and even their own troops to leify. Outraged by this supposed betrayal, the soldiers turned against their masters. Only years later did scholars uncover the truth. The contract was a lie, a clever trick caused to unite the people and take back the city. Vennessa clearly wasn't alone in her fight against the aristocracy. Roggenvinder joined her cause, and so did Kreutzlied, the last surviving member of the ill-fated Wanderers troupe, whose secret underground network proved vital to the uprising. The Gunhilders joined the rebellion, and even some within the Church of Favonius turned against the aristocracy, led by a mysterious figure known only as the Nameless Shepherd. With the rebellion's victory, the worst of the aristocrats were exiled, including their collaborators in the church and the royal mages. Only the clans who had remained honorable, like the Gunhilder family, were allowed to stay. Vennessa went on to found the Knights of Favonius, becoming its first Grand Master and earning the title of Dandelion Knight. She also helped restore the Church of Favonius, hoping to prevent another era of tyranny. Meanwhile, a Knight of Boreas arrived in Mondstadt and joined the cause, though his loyal wolf companion chose the wilderness over the city. When the wolf eventually died of old age, the knight left the order to wander the world. With the old order gone, Roggenvinder turned the aristocrats' lavish indoor bathhouse into something far more useful: Mondstadt's first public library. It eventually became the largest library in all of northern Tevat, until the Great Fire of Fall Equinox reduced it to a fraction of its former glory. Even so, the restricted section in the basement survived untouched, its secrets still locked behind heavy doors. The statue of Barbatos, originally erected by Venerari, was rebuilt after the aristocracy's fall, although the original inscription was lost to time. The new inscription apparently reads, "The Gateway of Celestia." Sometime after these events, the four winds of Mondstadt were formally established. Boreas became the Wolf of the North, Dvalin the Dragon of the East, and Vennessa took up two roles as the Lion of the South, a title held by all Grandmasters, and the Falcon of the West. Eventually, Vennessa was chosen by the gods and became one of the few known people in recorded history to ascend to Celestia. In her place, a massive oak tree grew, marking the spot of her ascension at Windrise. That tree would later serve as a conduit for divine energy, a place where Venti himself would return to purify the corruption of the abyss or heal his own wounds. But whatever happened to Eberhard? His father Landric organized an expedition to Sal Vindagnyr, hoping a major discovery would restore public faith in the aristocracy. The party included several young nobles, among them Ingbert, Luther, Nick, and the ever-scheming Eberhard. Once they reached the mountain, a snowstorm scattered part of the team. While regrouping at the base camp, Eberhard convinced the others to investigate a locked room rumored to contain frescoes and star-silver weapons. During the attempt, a cave-in killed Nick and buried their supplies. Later, Eberhard led Luther and Ingbert into a cellar and ambushed them. Both were badly wounded. Ingbert managed to fight back using his vision, forcing Eberhard to flee. As Luther bled out, he left behind a journal exposing Eberhard's treachery and warning Landric of a larger scheme. Eberhard tried to escape through an old prison and follow a hidden route to the sea, but Ingbert caught up to him. The brothers fought one final time, and Ingbert was killed. Eberhard reached his boat, intending to return to Mondstadt, but records show he never made it. His co-conspirator Priscilla waited to warn him, but she was captured by the nobles before she could light the signal. Whatever Eberhard's grand plan was, it died in the snow. Mondstadt was finally free, not just from gods, but from humans who had completely forgotten what freedom truly meant. The winds of change had blown once again, and the city was ready for its next chapter. Around 500 years ago, 3 key figures were born in Mondstadt: Arundolin, Rostam, and Rosalind Krushka Loefalter. Arundolin and Rostam grew up together and joined the Knights of Favonius. Arundolin would become the Grandmaster known as the Lion of Light, while Rostam, nicknamed the Wolf Pup, preferred to work in the shadows, doing what Arundolin couldn't. Behind the scenes, Rostam also kept Kreuzlied's old underground network alive. Rostam created the sword style known as Favonius Bladework, still used by the Knights today. Meanwhile, Arundolin's dual-wielding style, requiring immense strength, died out after him. Side note, but it'd be so cool if Varka somehow revived Arundolin's fighting style in double-wielded claymores or something. Eventually, Rostam fell in love with Rosalind. Rosalind left Mondstadt to study at the Sumeru Academia, unaware of the tragedy waiting just ahead. The Cataclysm struck Teyvat. Monsters from the abyss poured into the world, bringing chaos and destruction. Many blame their creation on a sinner named Gold, better known as Rhine-Daughter, Albedo's creator. Her twisted creations, known as Alphasol, were among the first to invade. Meanwhile, Conria, a powerful civilization with no god, was completely destroyed by the heavenly principles. Its fall caused devastation across the entire planet. The 7 Archons joined the conflict, but it was already too late. Everything was falling apart. In Mondstadt, Grandmaster Arundolin and his closest friend Rostam led the Knights of Favonius into battle. Rostam mentored a warrior known as the White Knight, a man who fought so fiercely against the abyss that people started to fear him. The White Knight later became the infamous Bloodstained Knight. After learning the truth about Conria's fall, he disappeared into the depths and joined the Abyss Order. At the same time, Rhine-Daughter released one of her most terrifying creations, Durin, a monstrous dragon previously prophesied by the princess of Sal Vindagnyr. Durin reached Mondstadt and began to destroy everything in his path. With Arundolin paralyzed by grief over Rostam's death, there was no one strong enough to face the dragon. In response to the people's prayers, Barbados called upon Dvalin. The Wind Dragon rose to fight Durin in a brutal battle. Though Dvalin won, he was poisoned by Durin's blood and retreated into Old Mondstadt to sleep. Durin's corpse crashed onto Vindagnyr, corrupting the mountain with abyssal energy. His heart continued to beat beneath Wormrest Valley, turning the land into a frozen grave. After the Cataclysm, the area would later be known as Dragonspine. It's possible the frost-bearing tree turns red after absorbing Durin's blood. Rosalind, upon hearing of her lover Rostam's death, returned to Mondstadt. In her grief and fury, she transformed herself using forbidden flame magic and became the Crimson Witch of Flames, one of the most feared beings in Teyvat's dark new chapter. After the chaos of the Cataclysm, Mondstadt was left to pick up the pieces. But not everyone came out of the tragedy the same. At some unknown point, before she was consumed entirely by her own flames, the Crimson Witch of Flames was discovered by none other than Piero, the very first Fatui Harbinger. Seeing her destructive potential, he offered her a cryo-delusion, putting out her flames and reshaping her into something even more dangerous, La Signora, the 8th of the Fatui Harbingers. Around 400 years ago, a curious ancestor of both Ella Musk and Dr. Edith wrote a research paper called An Investigation into the Cultural Customs of the Wind Kingdom, which gave future generations a look at Mondstadt's traditions. This work was later quoted in the book Breeze Amidst the Forest. Roughly 300 years ago, a man named Olaf was born in the quiet village of Springvale. During a hunt for a rare breed of boar on Dragonspine, he was accidentally frozen by a cryo-regisvine and preserved like a popsicle for centuries. Fun fact, those boars he was after are extinct pretty much everywhere except Dragonspine. And sometime under 200 years ago, a mysterious loch folk named Kalirui, nicknamed the Spring Fairy, moved from Fontaine to Springvale. She blessed the village waters with her magic, which is probably why the spring still flows so purely today. Approximately 50 years ago, a renowned mercenary from Liyue, Amber's grandfather, survived a devastating monster attack. Rescued by a doctor from the Knights of Favonius, he chose to settle in Mondstadt and join the Knights. There, he established the Outriders, a specialized division of archer scouts, and began training new recruits, including his own family. Around the same period, the adventurer Seamus Pegg settled in Mondstadt, joining the Church of Favonius and eventually becoming the Cardinal of Daybreak. He fell in love with Frederica Gunhilder of the esteemed Gunhilder clan, and together they had 2 daughters, Jean and Barbara. However, the couple eventually separated, with Jean staying with her mother and Barbara with her father. Approximately 12 years before the start of the story, Diluc received his pyrovision at the age of 10. A few years later, Kaya was left at the Dawn Winery by his biological father, becoming an adopted member of the Roggenvinder family. By the age of 14, Diluc had become the youngest cavalry captain in the history of the Knights of Favonius. Jean, at 15, was conferred the title of Dandelion Knight. On Diluc's 18th birthday, his father, Crepus Roggenvinder, died while protecting a caravan from Ursa the Drake using a Fatui delusion. The Knights of Favonius, aiming to maintain their reputation, covered up the true cause of death. Disillusioned, Diluc resigned from the Knights and embarked on a journey across Teyvat to uncover the truth behind delusions. During this time, Kaya also revealed his Khaenri'ah origins to Diluc, leading to a violent confrontation where Kaya received his cryovision. Following Crepus's death, the Fatui manipulated events to gain influence in Mondstadt. They used devices emitting mistgrass aroma to lure Ursa the Drake, allowing Ildetore to slay the beast and position the Fatui as saviors. Meanwhile, Diluc continued his crusade against the Fatui, dismantling their operations across Teyvat. His actions drew the attention of the Fatui Harbingers. Diluc narrowly escaped, aided by a mysterious observer from the north, and joined an underground network opposing the Fatui. In the aftermath, Amber's grandfather abruptly resigned from the Knights and disappeared, leading to the decline of the Outriders. Determined to uphold her grandfather's legacy, Amber became an official Outrider and received her pyrovision. Jean was promoted to Master of Knights after the discovery of internal corruption within the Knights, including the exposure of Inspector Erok as a traitor. Lisa, after graduating from Sumeru Academia, returned to Mondstadt, disillusioned, and chose a quieter life as a Knights librarian despite being offered the role of a captain. Meanwhile, young heroes like Fischl, Razor, and Mika joined the city's ranks, each gaining their own visions and beginning their journeys. About 3 years ago, Albedo was sent to Mondstadt by Alice and quickly rose to become the Knight's chief alchemist. Around that same time, Klee was entrusted to his care by her parents. Behind the scenes, a mysterious expedition led by Grandmaster Varka was planned and would depart 2.5 years later, with many senior knights and scouts, including Mika and Jean's mother Frederica, joining him. Just 6 months before the start of the story, Varka set off on that expedition, leaving Jean in charge of Mondstadt as the acting Grandmaster. Shortly after, Diluc returned home and reclaimed his pyrovision, becoming the city's elusive Dark Knight hero. Around this time, the events of the Genshin Impact webcomic unfold. The Fatui attempted to exploit Mondstadt's Ludi Harpastum festival, but their plot was thwarted by the Mondstadt crew. A mysterious girl named Kale, empowered by Archon residue and hunted by Fatui Harbinger Ildetore, became central to the chaos. Through quick thinking and sacrifice, the Knights of Favonius managed to expose and drive out the Fatui plotters. At some point, Dvalin awoke and returned to Mondstadt, but instead of a warm welcome, he was met with fear. The people had forgotten who he was, one of the revered Four Winds. Wounded by the rejection and still suffering from the poisoned blood left by Durin, Dvalin fell into the Abyss Order's influence. He abandoned his role as Dragon of the East and lashed out at the city. From then on, he was known only as Storm Terror, and the ruins of Decarabian's old city became his lair. And then, somewhere far from Mondstadt, a traveler awakens after being separated from their sibling and attacked by the unknown god. Lost in a strange, changed Teyvat, they wander until one fateful day when 2 months ago, they fish a strange floating companion out of the water. That floating companion is Paimon. She teaches them the local language, becomes their guide, and suggests a plan. Seek out the 7 Archons and uncover the truth behind their siblings' disappearance. And so begins the traveler's journey, right in the heart of Mondstadt. That was the entire history of Mondstadt from the ancient era right up until the beginning of Genshin's story. Thank you so much once again, Once Human, for sponsoring today's video. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video. I'm your leafy lore keeper Minsleif, and I read the Genshin Impact lore so that you don't have to.